welcome. I'm very excited for this. As a former teacher, it's nice to nerd out a little bit and talk about something as exciting as a city budget. You all know me, I'm your Councilman Eric Dinowitz. Before we begin, we have some very special people here that I want to acknowledge. The District Manager of Bronx Community Board 8, Farah Rubin, is here, as well as our State Committeeman, Michael Heller, and District Leader, Ben Jackson. And with us, we have our Assemblyman, Jeffrey Dinowitz, who will share a few words with everyone.
Oh, now?
You could do it from there. You're next to the cookies, which is like a good place to be.
Usually next to the cookies. Well, I'll be very brief because I'm not the person you came to see. But it's so nice to see so many people here on a August evening. We don't get that very often. I just want to say thank you. First of all, I'm thanking Eric because he called many people, including me, a very special person. That's very nice. But I really want to say thank you because the city budget, we were very concerned for months about the cuts to the libraries and all the other cuts that the mayor wanted to impose, and Eric and his colleagues prevented a lot of that from happening, and they did a lot of good stuff, which I'll talk about this evening, and that really makes a difference in our community. And I know we both fight to get funding into the community, and one thing I'll say is this year in the state budget, I was able to get $50,000 of the money that I have discretion over for the Y, and that money, I tell them to split it. Half of it should go to the senior center, and half should go to the theater program for the kids. And both of those programs are really important for our community. So with that, I will stop and enjoy the show.
I feel like it's a show. I think a lot of you know my history with the Y. I started coming here, I think, for camp in 4th grade, and then 10 years ago. And then I did the shows here through high school, and then my kids went to nursery school and pre-K here, and I know my dad goes to the gym here every morning. This is really a special place. So I also want to thank them. Matt Abrams-Gerber is somewhere here. He's out there. I want to thank him personally for always opening up the Y for everyone in the community. Me as a little kid, my dad, older adults, and for all of you for community events like this evening about the city budget. Of course, you can follow me on social media, sign up for my newsletter, but let's get started. So, the city budget. Before we even get started, I want to thank Jorge Avila, who you heard his beautiful music. I'm going to read his bio. I usually don't do reading, but he was so incredible. I'm going to do it. Honduran-born violinist Jorge Avila has won consistent high praise from the New York Times through his many appearances as a soloist, concertmaster, recitalist, and chamber musician. A recipient of various awards and honors, Jorge received his green card under the Extraordinary Talent category, later becoming a U.S. citizen. He was awarded first prize in the 2001 Mu Phi Epsilon music competition and the Omar Del Carlo Fellowship at Tanglewood Music Center. Jorge is concertmaster of the Ridgefield Symphony, DCINY, and Sacred Music in a Sacred Space series, and is longtime artist member of the Bronx Arts Ensemble, right here in the Bronx, which, speaking of the budget, we fund in the city budget through their contracts, but also locally through discretionary funding, $71,000 for the Bronx Arts Ensemble, for local programming, concerts, things in schools, education. He's appeared as concertmaster with the Stamford, Westfield, and Greenwich Symphonies. In 2015, Jorge served as concertmaster of the orchestra, appearing with His Holiness Pope Francis. But I understand he also performed for Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul II. He outlasts all the popes. All right. I don't know who's gonna replace you, but Bronx Arts Ensemble, send up the white smoke when you get someone as good as him to replace him. So the city budget, very exciting, very, very exciting. We as the council and the mayor, our jobs is supposed to be to listen to all of you and represent your values. So being in the community in the first place is something that's really important to me. And so whether it's a community board meeting, a street festival on Riverdale Avenue, here at the Y, Martin Luther King Day, doing a ride along with NYPD, looking at our planters, going to the Riverdale Neighborhood House, I try to get around as much as possible. And if you go to the previous slide, you see something I've done since I started in the council was office hours. My office is at 231st Street and Corlear Avenue in Kingsbridge. But we have people from all over the district, so it was very important that I and my staff get around the district. So once a month at 4 of the branches, we have a staff member there all day in Wakefield, Van Cortlandt Library, Mosholu, and the Riverdale Library to get all over the district. So today's presentation is the budget process, and we'll talk about what exactly we got in the actual budget, and then which includes citywide initiatives, my discretionary funding, and then what all of you can do to be engaged in the process. And then, of course, Q&A with the lovely Emily Houseman, Emily Houseman will be conducting the Q&A. So here's the budget process. Pretty much, it's a back and forth between the mayor and the council. It lasts from July 1st through June 30th. So we are right now in fiscal year 25. The mayor, he presents a preliminary budget in January. We hold hearings, we give a response. He presents his executive budget, we hold more hearings, and then we tussle it out, we agree to a budget. Now, I found this out relatively recently. In 1924, but 100 years ago, the budget was $370 million. I know you're laughing because you feel like that's nothing. 370 is a lot of money, but not that much when you look at this year's budget. This year's, in the executive budget, the mayor had actually proposed cuts to many of the services. I think the assemblyman mentioned cuts to our libraries, our parks, CUNY. There was a point where he was going to cancel an NYPD class. And I know how many of us in this community want to see more of that presence in the community. Early childhood education, school programs. So a lot of our fight in the city council was trying to beat back some of these cuts. And we'll talk a little more about what that looks like. But in the end, we passed a budget that was $2.4 billion more than what the mayor proposed. And this underscores our commitment to key restorations to preserve essential services that New Yorkers rely on, that allow for a safe and healthy city at $112.4 billion, which is a little more than $370 million. And so in our adopted budget, in addition to the actual money, we have what's called terms and conditions. And these are attachments to the budget. We had 65 adopted in the FY25. These attachments require the administration to typically do things like report. One of the big ones we got in last year's budget was the asylum response efforts. So we know month by month, agency by agency, how much the asylum response is costing and other information. We're getting more information this year. Early childhood education, information about that, Carter cases for students with disability, and strategic response group deployment. All things which are now going to help us in the council in our oversight capacity as members of the New York City Council. So before we go on, I should have said this earlier. If you have a question, I know some of you submitted on the Google form. Thank you. If you have a question, just raise your hand. And I have some staff members, Stephanie's right there, and some interns. They'll hand you a slip of paper. Write your question down, because your question may be the same as other people's questions. And Emily will go through all of those, and we'll have a little conversation after this. So here's our adopted budget. Now remember, our fight with the mayor, or let's call it a debate. I don't like to be antagonistic ever. Our debate with the mayor was about these services. One thing that's really important to understand about the city budget as compared to, let's say, the federal government is we have a finite amount of money. So part of it is part of the debate is our competing visions for what we want to see in the city. And part of the debate is just how much money we have. In January, there are two things to understand. One is in January, we don't have as much information as we do as the months progress. We have fewer tax receipts. The state budget hasn't come out yet. But the mayor also likes to be a little more conservative because as the time goes on, it gives him the ability to spend on his priorities. So a lot of the debate isn't just our values, it's logistical, how much money we have. But what we got, over $614 million to support city FEPs, 540.3 of that is baseline, which means next year we are starting at $540 million. Less debate next year. And those city FEPs vouchers help keep people in their homes, help prevent them from seeking shelter, ideally in the first place. We're in a bit of a legal battle with the mayor because in the council we passed some laws which said, you know what, you should be able to get city FEPs if you're going to be evicted. And right now the law was you had to be in shelter for I think 30 days before you qualified, which to us seemed to not make sense. It was more expensive to do that, and it was destabilizing for families. So right now it's in the courts because the mayor is saying the city council can't decide how we administer a program, and we're saying, well, we passed a law. We got a $32 million restoration of the Community Food Connection Program, which includes funding for MMCC, Marble Hill, and KHCC, all things that serve our district. And then we got a 10.7 baseline enhancement to fair fares. There are people in New York City who want to go to work, and the fare is a little high for them. So we said if you are 145% of the poverty level, you can qualify for this program to have your fare on the subway and bus reduced. So you can get to work a little more easily. Plus $2 million in outreach. By the way, that was the best cup of tea I ever had. With this little, yeah, it was amazing. One of the other challenges, she is cute. One of the other challenges we had in this budget was the expiring federal stimulus. So we knew that there were programs we had to restore. That was $293 million restoration and investment funding for early childhood education, including the addition of 3K pre-K seats, replacing federal funding, and really critically, outreach efforts. One of the debates that we had with the mayor was, he would say, we have excess seats in certain areas. And so we don't need that many seats in certain neighborhoods. We can reduce our costs or our allocated costs that way. And we in the city council said, you know what, when pre-K started back, I think in 2014, the city did a really great job making sure everyone knew that there was this free pre-K program. So let's invest a little money in making sure people know about these efforts. Special education seats for 3K, and those are just some of the things. K-12 education, that kid's also pretty cute. $418 million added from the executive budget to support our schools, community schools, shelter-based coordinators, restorative justice, mental health support, all things I can tell you from being in the classroom have a profound impact on the success of our students. And this was something we were able to restore in the budget. And of course, what I love, arts education, more and more funding for that. Older adults. This, by the way, is the Riverdale Y. Yeah, I love I love coming to the Y. I said it when I started, but I see so many friendly faces. And the mayor had his town hall here, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, and it was just, I stopped by. It was really nice to see so many friendly faces in the audience. $4.75 million increase to home delivered meals, $12.2 million restoration for older adult centers, which the mayor had proposed cutting. We were able to get $12.2 million back. And for my district, for District 11, outside of the contracts that each center has, we got an additional $1.1 million for services here in District 11 for older adults in this fiscal year alone. You're welcome. That was you? That was me. You're welcome. You know, it's not $1.1 million for you in a briefcase, right? It's.
I know it's tough.
Okay, just It's tough. This was one of the big battles we had. Every year, the mayor proposes cutting our cultural institutions. He cut in November plan. He did these pegs, and he was proposing really decimating them. We not only got a 60.6 million restoration, but 13 million baseline, which again means starting next year, that's where we start negotiations. Same with our library service. We restored it $58.3 million with 42.6 million baseline. In some places, that means Sunday service. In other places, like here in Riverdale, that means a new drop box at the Spite and Diva Library. That means Mozart and Scribble at the Riverdale branch. That means this after-school STEM programs at the Kingsbridge Library. That's what that money goes to. It goes right to our community. And $2 billion increase over the next 2 years in capital funding for the creation and preservation of more affordable rental, housing, and home ownership opportunities, which was one of the really big, I think, really big wins for us in the community. And something I know this community loves, community composting. I know you're nodding your head, Jack. So this was a big one because the mayor, I think many of you in this room know, 3 years ago, they were piloting the curbside compost. And because of our advocacy, in partnership with some of you in this room, including Community Board 8, Bronx Council on Environmental Quality, we got curbside composting here in the district. Legislative, we expanded that, and we had community composting. The mayor cut it. In November, I think there was a private philanthropist who funded it, but that funding also expired, so we in the council invested $6.2 million for community compost. And these encourage our neighbors to learn about participating in the new, it's for education and for the curbside. A little animation. You can do the next one. Watch it whoosh. Very technologically advanced in my office, but this is good for our environment. It's good for our economy. And so we're really proud to invest that money citywide, the $6.2 million, in community composting. And CUNY. CUNY's a big one. The mayor really proposed these drastic cuts to CUNY. And what's really tough is on top of that, CUNY, like every college, has seen a decrease in enrollment, which affects their bottom line. And they didn't have this year the right projection. So they ended the year actually with a little less money than they thought they would. So these problems compound each other. And to me, these are vicious cycles. So what we said was, we want to make sure we have $15 million for your operational support, but $48 million for programs that help engage people and keep them in school, like CUNY Reconnect. CUNY Reconnect was a program of the speakers, started last year, I think, that brings people back who have some college credit into CUNY, provides them an advisor, the support they need so they can get their degree. CUNY ACE for our four-year colleges provides wraparound services, maybe a Metro card, help with textbooks if you need it, provides all the supports you need to stay in school. Same with ASAP for our two-year colleges, and piloting a social work fellowship program to try to encourage more people to become social workers, which is, I think, critically important here in the Bronx. Now comes what I think is the fun part. That was our citywide, that was just some highlights. Yeah, Mayor, I'm playing the drums. And because it's not a video or sound, you don't know how I sound. I'm pretty sure I was on the beat. It's actually, I was at Riverdale Neighborhood House, and the drummer, foolishly, took a food break. And what do you do when you see an empty chair at a drum set? You obviously sit at it. So one of the things that we do as council members, we have discretionary funding, and we allocate that funding. We also work with the Speaker's office to secure more funding, and we have citywide initiatives. And we'll talk about some of those, but there are different pots of money through which I advocate and secure funding. And so the Riverdale Y, for instance, $160,000 plus $50,000 for hate crime prevention. And so this year, for example, they had the first year they did We Are the Bronx Fellowship Against Hate, which is a terrible acronym, but a great name. And they had people from all over the Bronx, different backgrounds, coming together learning about each other's cultures, and they have other sorts of community building activities. And that was the vision behind this extra $275,000 that I got in the city budget a few years ago that is renewed every year to bring communities together, right? To fight hate, bringing us together. Riverdale Senior Services, $449,000 for things like digital inclusion, operating expenses, geriatric mental health. Riverdale Mental Health Association, $306,000. The Neighborhood House, believe me, that wasn't a bribe for letting me play the drums. They do older adult reassurance program. They run a teen market, teen internship programs, and that's where this funding goes. So if you ever go to the market, or if you ever received a phone call from their telephone reassurance program, or there's a teen going to their after-school program, that's where this funding goes, right to our neighborhood. Hebrew Home for the Aged, $150,000. Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, cleanup services, internships, educational programs, $132,000. I would note, by the way, you're noticing a lot of Riverdale on here. I'm tailoring it to where I am. But we allocate money and secure money for all over the district. And we'll get to how you can find out where all that money goes a little later. I think some of you who are at the market on Sunday know about our health bucks. This year, we allocated $5,000 for health bucks, which are $2 vouchers that people can use at farmers markets. And as a teacher who saw kids bringing Doritos and Pepsi for breakfast, and when I saw what health and outdoor education, how that changed their diet, I said, you know, we got to do something. I opened up food distribution sites way early in my tenure as council member. And now we're allocating the $5,000 for the health bucks and $15,000 for Grow NYC for educational outreach and for the farmers market in Norwood. They do educational programs, including at Riverdale Senior Services. New York Horticultural Society, $140,000. They do after-school programs at 7 of our schools. And if you've ever seen, for example, the planters along Riverdale Avenue, that's through the work we do. They help beautify the neighborhood. That's some of the work that they do. Female Fight Club, you all know, free health nutrition classes, workout classes for the community. We allocate $5,000 for their free program. The Kingsbridge Historical Society, $10,000. KRVC, $30,000. They do arts, help with businesses, community engagement. West Bronx Housing, and I do want to know we have Josh Stevenson here, the Executive Director of West Bronx Housing. You should actually, I'm not going to scold you, you should actually be clapping a little louder for him, because there's two, well, let me tell you what he does first. But thank you for being a compliant audience. So we allocate funding, other members also allocate funding, and I was able to secure in the budget, I think starting last year or 2 years ago, more citywide funding. To put it plainly, they keep people in their homes. Yeah, thank you, Merritt. And there's two things that are incredible about that. One is they send us a report, they keep people in their homes, they do office hours in my office. And the really tough cases are when people are at their worst, they're at their best. They're keeping them in their homes. And financially, fiscally for our city, they're bringing in more money than we are paying them. And they send me a report every year about, I think it's over $1 million, 1.25 maybe just to my district alone, in things like SNAP benefits, Medicaid, other housing, state, all of these federal and state funds, they bring those in. So whether you are a good-hearted person and believe that people should stay in their homes, because you're a decent human, or you are just someone who thinks it's really good to make wise investments with our dollars, West Bronx Housing is the way to go. So let's give Josh Stevenson and West Bronx Housing a hand, please. And then Wave Hill, $75,000, internship programs. If any of you did Sunset in the park this year, some of that funding goes to that as well. And then there's capital funding. We had a lot of big investments made in our community. Every single branch, I have 7 branches of the NYPL in my district. Every single branch is getting a technology refresh, plus ADA upgrades at the Wakefield branch. Every single elementary school is getting some investment in technology or facility to the tune of $6.5 million. Some of the more local ones, working with the borough president, we're investing $750,000 for a new playground at PS 24, $175,000 for a hydroponics lab at PS 81, and $400,000 for RKA. And this is, of course, on top of years of investment at these schools, technology for years to come, library investment at RKA, Seton Park investing $2 million, Wave Hill, ADA compliant walkways so people with disabilities, older adults can access more of Wave Hill. And that was funding we secured working with not just me, but the Speaker's office and the Bronx delegation to secure that $1.4 million. And again, working with the Speaker's office, $2 million for technology labs at Lehman College. $730,000 for, I think, a mammography van and I believe an MRI machine at North Central Bronx and Montefiore. So we're investing in our parks, in our schools, and in our health. Now, this didn't just come to me. I don't sit in front of a computer and decide what looks good on a spreadsheet. There are multiple ways that you all provide feedback. Community boards are, I think, one of the ones we're most familiar with. I think last year around October, I sat with David Gelman, who's the chair of the Budget Committee, and Farah Rubin, the district manager of Community Board 8. Heard about their priorities. They are going through their priorities on Community Board 8 right now for fiscal year 26. We barely just passed 25, and they're like, I'm done. I'm on to the next thing. And so going through your local community board, attending those meetings, making your voice heard there is one way. Community education councils, going straight to me, and we actually have a budget feedback form, a Google form, that people share whatever their thoughts are. And you can actually go to Eric Dinowitz on NYC/budget-feedback, fill out that Google form today. I promise you I won't be offended if you take out your phones now and do it. And these are all different ways to make sure I know what's important to you. I think one of the worst things we hear about is after an event occurs, whether it's a budget or a community event, people say how disappointed they were, but they never made their voice heard. And so what's critically important for all of you, and you're starting to do it by being here tonight, is making sure that we are aware of your priorities. And so now in FY26, keep thinking about it. I know the community boards have already started. I think October, they already have it. I've already gone over some of it with them, but they release in October, they vote on it. Share your feedback with me. And this could be anything from a park. Maybe your kid goes to a school and you say they really need a new blank. And then I talk to the principal. Sometimes it's budget, and sometimes it's a matter of working with agencies. We've had budget, we've had really great success with SCA getting air conditioning in some of our local schools, not through the budget, but from working collaboratively with our agencies. So lots of ways to get in touch with me. All of the information I shared with you, albeit in a less digestible form, is available on the council website, council.nyc.gov/budget. Everything is public. You can search. There's a whole long document. Some of it's a little hard to get through. But if you're more interested, I promise you, call my office. We'll walk you right through it. And now I would like to hit the lights. I don't know where the lights are. Oh, thank you, Emily. I'd like to call up Emily Hausman, and reminder, if any of you have questions, to raise your hand, and Stephanie will come over to you with one of the papers.
Eric, may I just interject?
Yes, while I'm moving chairs, you may.
He mentioned that the community board will be voting on fiscal year 26 priorities in October, but we will be posting it, on the website late next month in advance of that meeting, and before that October meeting, which is usually about the second Tuesday in October, we will have a budget hearing where we welcome you to come and comment on that which you see from the perspective of fiscal 26 budget.
Thank you. That was perfect timing, too, because I just got my folder, set the chairs up. No one noticed because they were all paying attention to you. I'd like to call him now Emily Houseman. I actually met Emily around the corner on this floor while my 2-year-old kids were screaming their heads off for a month and a half straight.
October 24th.
She remembers the date where they it's
stopped.
it's as our president said, it's not a joke. They were every day screaming. They were twins. I think they just saw the other one screaming. They were like, it is okay to scream the entire day. And that's how all the seniors knew them as well at the senior center. And over the years, I've just grown to know her as someone who is deeply committed to the community, directing the Early Childhood Center here, now at SAR, Infant and Toddler Center, member of Community Board 8. And so now please give a round of applause to Emily Houseman, who will conduct our Q&A portion.
High chairs.
Yes, I feel like a big boy in the high chair.
Okay. Last time we had a table and I felt like a little more. It's not important. Last time we had a table and I felt a little more organized.
Now you got to hold your
Now I
papers.
have to hold the papers. So sorry. Okay. Eric, thank you so much for painting a picture. One thing I want to start with, it's actually just a personal question, is you spoke vision, and something that I love about our local elected officials is really how they have vision for our community. And you spoke about a difference between the council's vision and the mayor's vision. So can you first open up about your vision for the budget and how you approach it?
Yeah, and I think you can see this vision in the preliminary budget and the executive budget. That's where the mayor, who does have a lot of power and authority in this process, that's where he lays out exactly what he wants to do. And he said the libraries, the CUNY, the schools, these aren't as important to New Yorkers. And one of the things we had rallies with the seniors. I think some of you might have actually gone downtown. We said, you know what, for the people who invested their time and their energy and their life in our city, we should invest a little more in them and make sure our senior centers are funded. With the city FEPs that I mentioned, we said, let's have a city where we're trying as best we can not to incentivize people to go to a shelter before they try to go back into housing. Let's have people try to stay in their homes. Libraries, arts, CUNY, these were all things, investment in the future of our city that we in the council put at the forefront. And based on the difference between the executive budget and what we passed, I would say that we did pretty well in pushing back against some of the worst of the mayor's cuts and making some pretty good investments.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and start with local neighborhood things. Let's do schools, library,
Okay.
housing.
Oh yeah, very small things, housing. But our number one complaint in the office is housing, but yeah.
What is the budget regarding what's in the budget regarding affordable housing and improvements to school facilities here in the district?
So the school budget, we were able to get a lot of capital improvements for schools. I mentioned $750,000 working with our borough president for a new playground at PS24. And I just have to share, by the way, that wasn't something any parent asked. The school barely asked. I got a stack of letters from some first graders at PS24. The principal handed them to me at their winter concert, and I read them. I said, we got to make this investment. And the principal obviously wanted it, but he wasn't the one who asked. I think I said 175 at PS81, 400,000 at RKA. In years past, for INTA, we got $1 million. Last year, $5 million for the Kennedy campus, working with Carmen De La Rosa and Borough President Gibson for their football field. And so that's what kind of we directly control. I think some of the other things are, spending in a school, their budget is based on what's called the Fair Student Funding Formula. And per student, depending on their IEP, E&L status, things like that, they get a certain allocation for their operating expenses. And so very often their budgets are dependent on that. One of the concerns I had, not that you asked, but one of the concerns I have is what happens when the budget, the actual budget doesn't match the school's projected budget. Because principals have to start planning in May, June for next year. And so what we said is we got to an agreement last year, the DOE said, all right, we're not gonna cut the budget at the beginning of the year. We're gonna freeze the budgets in September. And we'll adjust them in November. If you see significantly fewer students, we're gonna decrease your individual school's budget. But that was one of the wins that we got I think it was last year, where they froze the September budget. So principals could more easily plan, not have to excess teachers if it was unnecessary.
So how much is allocated in the budget for District 10 schools? And I want to stop and say, because I know it's confusing, we live in District 11 for the City Council, but our schools are in our District 10. Not the City Council District 10, but the school district, District 10.
Yeah, this is actually, I think, a little complicated, because as I mentioned, you have I mentioned the investments that I made as with discretionary funding, and again, working with the speaker, investments in capital I was directly able to make. I was directly able to work with the school construction authority on upgrading the air conditioners. Now that isn't, allocated to District 10 per se. That is money they have in their budget for the city to do that kind of work. So I think it's a little more of a complicated question than District 10's allocated this much, 11. Not to mention that District 10 extends far beyond the bounds of my district, and also I have a handful of schools in School District 11. So it's a little hard to parse that out.
Thank you. And you mentioned libraries a few times. What provisions do you propose to increase for the NYPL? More money would keep more branches open on Sunday, would provide funds for purchasing new books, would allow new hires.
I totally agree. This is one of the fights we had. So one of the good things in this budget was that, as I mentioned earlier, we baselined the funding. The mayor was able to say, all right, $60,000, cut, starting at zero. And we had to inch our way back up from that. The NYPL budget hasn't grown, I think, enough over the years. And what I'm hoping for next year is for increased funding. But that's why it was important to me to invest capital funding in our libraries. As I mentioned, every single branch is getting technology upgrades, and the Wakefield branch is getting accessibility upgrades. So that's why I made those. And by the way, that was also funded in conjunction with Borough President Gibson.
So to move on to the housing section of the neighborhood, you ready for it?
Maybe.
Okay. The Amalgamated Housing Cooperative future and funding perspective, sorry, I'm going to read off here, but I think, let's take this one. It's all going to hit the same points. I'm sorry.
Okay.
In reference to the amalgamated increases and why SCREE is not being increased as well, also, why are the buildings being demolished for affordable housing? Basically, can you touch on the amalgamated housing situation and the rent increases they're looking at?
Yes. Okay. And the buildings demolished. This is a whole big thing. Okay, so we're seeing limited equity co-ops like the amalgamated. We are seeing Park Reservoir. We're seeing Tracy Towers, Mitchell-Lamas, Cannon Heights, Woodlawn Veteran Housing, seeing staggering increases in their rent, their carrying charges, their maintenance. I happen to think it's atrocious. In the case of the amalgamated, I think it's generally understood in the community now that HCR, the state agency, it's state run, they sort of drag their feet on taking out loans to do capital improvements. Now interest rates are higher and it's even tougher. As it relates to carrying increases, I went to a Zoom meeting, I went to the meeting to HCR and spoke out against these significant increases, particularly in places like the amalgamated that are designed for lower middle income New Yorkers, disproportionately house more older adults than our other forms of housing. Assemblyman Dinowitz was able to secure $10 million in the budget for amalgamated housing, which is an incredible investment for that community. In this budget, and I want to get the name of the program right, because in this budget we allocated an additional $2 billion for housing programs. One of the programs, and I checked, the Amalgamated and Mitchell-Lamas are eligible for this program. It's called the Multifamily Preservation Loan Program through HPD. We increased that loan amount that we allocated by $45.6 million. That's how much we added on top of what was already there. And so anyone from the Amalgamated, I encourage them, and we'll reach out, they should be working with my office to see how and if that would benefit their building to take out those loans. Because the argument I always make, as houses are being demolished and more dense buildings are being built, I had this meeting today with housing advocates. I testify about this. I say it is great that you want to build more housing, but we have affordable housing that is becoming more and more unaffordable. And the answer to housing isn't just to build new housing, it's to keep and preserve the affordable housing that we already have. You mentioned SCREE, so I want to touch on that. The actual limit to SCREE is still $50,000. It's been frozen that way for a number of years. I obviously think it should be increased, which is a state decision. I believe its state legislature has to control that or allow us to do that. But I passed a bill in the city council. Now this only refers to city-run Mitchell-Lamas, but it does deal with SCREE. We have older adults living in city-run Mitchell-Lamas, like Tracy Towers, like Cannon Heights, who are seeing 22% rent increases. At Cannon Heights, it was 40% maintenance increase plus assessments. And HPD comes to the building and they say, oh, you know what? You should just apply for SCREE. And my response is, you're HPD. You should apply for SCREE for them. And for those of you that don't know, in the Amalgamated housing like that, Mitchell-Lamas, you fill out an income affidavit. You tell the city what your name is, your social security number, your income, pretty much all of the information you need to put on your SCREE application. So the bill that I passed said for city-run Mitchell-Lamas, because that's all we can legislate, HPD now has the responsibilities to be implemented next year of filling out that SCREE form for anyone who looks like they qualify, which means they make $50,000 or less, they live in the city of Mitchell-Lama, and they're 62 or older, and they're paying a third or more of their income on rent. And so that, I think, is going to be transformative for the 44,000 units, which are disproportionately higher, more older adults.
So we spoke about current housing. Let's talk about housing to come.
Yes.
What is somebody? I'm going to take a step back.
Is it the handwriting? Can you not read it?
Nope, it's not the handwriting.
There's a lot of doctors in the audience.
No.
Okay.
I'm an early childhood educator. I got the handwriting covered.
Your kids aren't writing yet. I don't know.
You write all kinds of things. The city of yes. There's multiple questions here. So did the community board 8 vote no on the above?
They actually wrote They actually wrote a really scathing criticism of City of Yes. So I'll tell you what City of Yes is. City of Yes is essentially, it's a zoning text amendment, but essentially what it does is it loosens the rules of what can be built as of right. I think a lot of us in our community have seen those single-family homes being demolished and the 4-story, 5, 6-story buildings go up, and we get a lot of outreach. Hey, like, stop the development. And whether or not I personally believe a development is good or not, we don't have the authority to stop it. There's no mechanism for us to stop it or to even officially have leverage over the developer, as opposed to a ULURP, which requires a rezoning, which requires a vote of the city council, which means we have a little more leverage in deciding, what the development looks like, or even if we want it at all. And so what the City of Yes would do is it would make it easier to build more dense as of right buildings, including what are called SROs, which are sort of dormitory style buildings, including what they call 20% bonus for 20% more floors or housing if those 20% are affordable, removing parking minimums, allowing the construction of accessory dwelling units on single-family property homes. The way they are couching it is a little more housing everywhere. Our experience in the community is a little different. Removing parking minimums here, more density here, means something a little different than it would in Manhattan. This is something you should know that I have expressed to the housing advocates, the proponents of City of Yes, both outside and inside the government. What City of Yes is not, it is not a holistic approach to infrastructure. For example, Broadway. Take Broadway, for example. I don't know if any of you live there, but we get lots of complaints of flooding. We get it all over the district, but in moderate rains, water comes up from the sewer, in part because of our combined sewer. Your home water, showers, toilets, sinks, combines in our entire sewer system with the rainwater. So when it rains too much, it overflows into our rivers, and sometimes it comes up through our sewers. Now imagine more housing stressing our already stressed sewer system. I mean, that is just one small example, but things like roads, public transportation, schools, emergency vehicles, these things aren't touched in this zoning text amendment. So that's another issue with this. On the other hand, and I will say candidly, in addition to preserving housing, I think there is an argument to build more housing. So it is a discussion that needs to be had, but I think this Community Board 8 identified as a one-size-fits-all approach and not investing in infrastructure is a huge hurdle to building more housing or to the City of Yes proposal.
And how do the other community boards in the district vote?
Well, a majority of community boards in New York City voted against it. Some of them provided feedback, some didn't. But this is not something that has, at least as far as the community boards are concerned, overwhelming support throughout the city.
And as we talk about new housing and new neighbors, what is the impact of the migrant crisis on the budget, both in reference to the city as a whole and the family shelter that is going to be built on 238th and Waldo?
Sorry, I'm smiling because this is like the most complicated issue. Okay.
City of Yes?
No, not the city. Yeah, I think the migrant crisis is probably has that intersection of budgetary impact, community impact, and like real emotional response. I think it's important for everyone here for me to start out by saying it's important that none of us here demonize anyone. When I see asylum seekers, they are in our communities. Our job is to help them and not pit asylum seekers against any community, and not blame them as if they are some other people. They are like now our neighbors. They are people who just come from other countries. That's it. It's really important we are not othering them. So some of the work I've done, when we had our first family shelter in Wakefield, family migrant shelter, was my immediate concern was making sure they had the resources that they needed. In part for them, in part because it is the right thing to do to help people who are fleeing really atrocious, dangerous situations in many cases, people who make arduous journeys with children. And we've also seen the impact when they don't receive services, how it has in the community. For example, luckily the worst we've heard is panhandling, which is a thing I think a lot of our neighbors don't want. They don't want people knocking on their door asking for money, and I think that's reasonable. I want to zoom out for a second, and I will say this in the most objective way possible to talk about the crisis we're in to begin with. A couple years back, a Republican governor of Texas decided to traffic humans across state lines and dump human beings in New York City. I mean, that is what happened. And so now we are managing this crisis. there was also an opportunity for the federal government to address this. But a former president, who also just happens to be a Republican, I'm not being political, I am just being very objective. He called up some member of Congress and said, you know, the bipartisan bill that would have put more controls on asylum seekers, hired, I think, 4,500 more people to see those cases, get speedy cases, increase the number of legal immigrants, both family visas and worker visas. Let's just scuttle it because I think it would be a good win for Biden. So you have a Republican governor trafficking humans and a Republican former president who says, I know this would help solve the problem, but it's a political win for the other side, so I don't want to do it. It's why we pay attention to things like what's going on in Venezuela. And look, the far left has endorsed Maduro. They've supported him staying there, and analysts have said it's going to result in more Venezuelans fleeing for their lives, political dissidents fleeing for their lives. That's what we're seeing. That's going to have a direct impact on us in New York City. And so I do think it's important to just take a step back, recognize whether it's a Republican governor, a Republican former president, or, you know, I think the far left supporting this tyrant in Venezuela. Those are sorts of things that do impact us here. Coming to the city, there is a financial impact. Last fiscal budget, $3.72 billion was spent. Now, about $100 million of that was from the federal government, and another about $1 billion was allocated from the state. But the city, with the funds it received, spent $3.72 billion on managing the crisis. And that means housing and social services and everything connected. One of the things that was important in the city council was we have transparency. So we have a monthly report. It's available on the council website under terms and conditions in FY24 that everyone here can see month to month how much each agency is spending and where that money is going. And it was something like $300 somewhat a night per migrant. And they just take the total cost, divide by total number of migrants. We allocated $475 billion for migrants, for asylum seekers this year. Now, if that number ends up being less, we then have more money at the end of the year to prepay for other services for next year or to spend on other priorities. And that's what happens when you have a limited amount of money. You have to allocate and make your best guess. As it relates to 238th Street, you know, we've been back and forth with the administration. You know, when Manhattan College sold it to Stagg said, you know, it's not going to be a shelter. Then they said, just kidding. And part of this has to do with budgetary reasons. The city gives more financial incentives for developers to build shelters than they do to build housing, which I think is a little bit backwards. It's a lot easier for them to get funding and to finance it. And so when the city comes along and says, hey, how about housing some migrants here for 9 months, which is what the contract is for, Stagg said yes. Right now, what's important to me is saying we have new neighbors coming in. We have to make sure that they are receiving the services that they need to be successful, and that the people currently living in our community who've, you know, chosen here to make their home or to retire here also have the support that they need. And that can look like anything. It can look like making sure that the school, PS24, which I believe is the zone school, has the resources that they need, including ESL teachers. You know, making sure that the people in the shelter have, if they're eligible, have access to jobs. West Hab is the nonprofit that is managing the site. According to the city, West Hab is supposed to manage security and social services and all the wraparound supports. That is what is supposed to happen. We are having a meeting with them I don't have the exact date. We're having a meeting with West Hab and the Department of Social Services to make sure that they are responsibly spending the money, administering the money, because we've had issues in the past with the city not doing their job. We had the family shelter at the Van Cortlandt Motel, and we had to do a surprise visit there because we heard there was mold in the rooms where kids were staying. We heard there was vermin. We saw the mold, and you know, they ended up closing that site. But luckily we had places like the Y who helped organize, along with my office, clothing drives and support for the asylum seekers here in our district.
Thank you. And in the city, you mentioned about striving to keep people in their housing. The city council FY25 budget expense budget adjustment summary shows funds allocated to potentially homeless individuals and families, as well as low-income individuals and families via a pilot program. What is the process for assessing that risk of homelessness in District 11? And is there like more funds being granted to help with that?
So I believe that refers to a city council initiative. So I think like anyone who's dealt with a budget knows all the money comes from like different pots of money. The city council, we have our own priorities that we sort of more directly control the funds. And I believe that's referring to a city council initiative. What we do sometimes is we say, all right, we don't know where the money is going yet, but we know we want to allocate a certain amount of money to an initiative. And we adopt this, we allocate this funding what's called post-adoption, after adoption. So typically nonprofits like West Bronx Housing get this funding, nonprofits that do the work in high needs areas. And the citywide initiatives are designed to make sure that the funding is going to at least, I think, 3 boroughs. And there are I think, 50-something different initiatives with different focuses. So I don't believe those funds have been allocated yet, but it would be working with the nonprofit organization that does that work.
Amazing. And we spoke about where we live, but also the businesses where we live. Can anything be done about commercial landlords to keep storefronts empty? Can they be fined for this practice?
I think that what that question refers to is called a vacancy tax, which is a tax on vacancies. This is something that I believe needs to be passed in the state. And the idea is to incentivize businesses to try to bring in, incentivize landlords to bring in businesses, or incentivize landlords to keep the businesses that are there. We have a problem with vacant storefronts. I am personally in favor of things like a vacancy tax because I do think it provides those incentives. And if not, the tax can go to something good, like supporting our small businesses who I know are really struggling. We in my office make sure small business services, they have a van and making sure they go from business to provide the support that our local businesses need. But I think that's referring to something that is more in control by the state.
Infrastructure, are you ready?
I don't know, maybe. Depends on the question.
How do we get roads resurfaced, for example, 249th to Wave Hill and Independence?
We bugged the DOT. This is actually something that we're working on now in certain spots. The DOT in that particular area wants to have a hands-off approach because what they're saying is, oh, those streets don't belong to us. They're unmapped. They're undedicated streets. So this is a real, fight we've been having for I think years with them about those particular areas that are that are unmapped. I do want to say I used to hate the DOT the most. They used to be my least favorite agency. They've actually, we've had a number of incidents with anti-Semitic graffiti on street signs, on lampposts and bus stops. And I do need to say that the Bronx DOT Commissioner, Anthony Perez, and the Bronx DOT has been very good about, I think, very quickly tending to those needs, about painting it over when we see them, and really being attentive to that. So I'm talking about the graffiti. No, I know. I'm saying that area, Merritt, is a fight because they say they don't own the streets. We'll talk after, but it is constant advocacy. You'll see roads being paved all over, but we have to push the DOT like we push all agencies. So I think this is less a matter of am I allocating funding? This is a matter of working with the agencies. And I think it's getting late, so I think we'll do one more question and then we'll wrap it up. You gotta choose wisely.
No, I got it.
Okay.
What is the most important change in the budget from FY24 to FY25, and how does it affect our community?
The most important change? I mean, I'd like to say all the money I brought to the district, but that's not a change because I keep bringing money to the district. No, I think one of the things I think we did well in this year's budget was not just allocating money to things like pre-K and 3K. I mentioned before this disagreement we had with the administration about allocation of seats and funding. And so we said, all right, let's allocate funding to advertisement. Let's actually do a pilot program and allocate funding to full day 3K. You know, because maybe 9 o'clock, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., maybe parents aren't sending their kids there because who has a job that lasts from 9 to 2? Not many people. Let's try full day 3K. And let's make sure we're having regular meetings together on the implementation of universal 3K and pre-K and actually trying to start working together and hearing each other's priorities and hearing directly on the ground what our individual communities need. So not just the budget, but the implementation of the budget I think is important.
Amazing. I want to thank you for not only all the money you brought directly into the district, but also the transparency and really the shared vision you created as you hear from all of your constituents in the community board. So really, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. By the way, give Emily a round of applause. Thank you, Emily. And I want to thank all of you. I think every time we have community events like this, it reminds me what I love so much about where I live is the engagement of all of you, the interest you have in something that isn't the most exciting topic, albeit, but you all come here with interest in your questions, so I'm greatly appreciative of all of you. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.